Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is Dany's Dragon Bonds, Volume 2, Part 3. Black trees cannot corrupt black scales. Continuing our investigation of Dany and her dragons in A Clash of Kings. Now as they enter the House of the Undying in Qarth, escorted by the warlock Pyat Pree. A Clash of Kings, Daenerys 4. Drogon, who is with her for this entire chapter, hisses in the first scene as they approach the Palace of Dust, obviously disliking the place, and with good reason. He may be mirroring Dany's own disquiet, but I think this is more an indication of his own sense of the place. In our Dire Wolves series, it is determined that the wolves can sniff out falsehood and danger. I get the impression from this chapter that Drogon has that same ability. His sense of danger seems to show throughout the chapter, and it even seems that he is shepherding Dany away from some of the more dangerous places in the complex, suggesting the theme of protection.
She understood now why Xaro, Xhoan, Daxos called it the Palace of Dust. Even Drogon seemed disquieted by the sight of it. The black dragon hissed, smoke seeping out between his sharp teeth.
Side note, I know that dragons do not have an obvious gender, so I beg you to forgive me if I apply male gender pronouns to them from time to time. I choose to do this for 3 reasons. First, that their namesakes were male. Second, that George R. R. Martin does this himself, as in the prior excerpt. And third, that male pronouns make it easier to delineate the dragons from Dany in a sentence. I'll use the male pronoun for Drogon for the duration of this chapter analysis. If anyone has any specific textual evidence about the gender of any of the 3 dragons, setting aside the assertion by Septim Barth that the dragons are gender fluid, please send me a note on what you've discovered. The next time Drogon is mentioned, it seems apparent that something is tracking Dany through the walls of the place. Drogon seems to sense it, trying in vain to get at it. Given that Dany and Drogon both seem to sense the same things, I do wonder to what degree their minds are melded at this point in the story. Could Dany be hearing with Drogon's ears, much as Jon senses what Ghost can smell and hear at certain times in the story?
The 4th room was oval rather than square, and walled in worm-eaten wood in place of stone. 6 passages led out from it in place of 4. Dany chose the rightmost, and entered a long, dim, high-ceilinged hall. Along the right hand was a row of torches, burning with a smoky orange light, but the only doors were to her left. Drogon unfolded wide black wings and beat the stale air. He flew 20 feet before thudding to an undignified crash. Dany strode after him.
Later.
Dany could hear sounds within the walls, a faint scurrying and a scrabbling that made her think of rats. Drogon heard them too. His head moved as he followed the sounds, and when they stopped, he gave an angry scream. Other sounds, even more disturbing, came through some of the closed doors.
In the next scene, they almost work as one to run away from whatever is frightening them. The theme of protection is evident.
The long hall went on and on and on, with endless doors to her left and only torches to her right. She ran past more doors than she could count, closed doors and open ones, doors of wood and doors of iron, carved doors and plain ones, doors with pulls and doors with locks and doors with knockers. Drogon lashed against her back, urging her on, and Dany ran until she could run no more.
After that, she sees one of several visions in the chapter. This one seems to be Aerys talking to his hand, the pyromancer Rossart, after receiving a report from the Battle of the Trident. We learn elsewhere in the text that Jaime overheard this conversation, although his account is slightly varied in dialogue to what Dany sees. Drogon's part is to shriek. It is unclear if the dragon is in agreement with Aerys or not, but I lean toward not, because they quickly move on. He may be protectively breaking the spell the vision is casting upon Dany's mind.
Finally, a great pair of bronze doors appeared to her left, grander than the rest. They swung open as she neared, and she had to stop and look. Beyond loomed a cavernous stone hall, the largest she had ever seen. The skulls of dead dragons looked down from its walls. Upon a towering barbed throne sat an old man in rich robes, an old man with dark eyes and long silver-gray beard. "Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat," he said to a man below him. "Let him be the king of ashes." Drogon shrieked, his claws digging through silk and skin. But the king on his throne never heard, and Dany moved on.
In another vision, she sees Rhaegar and his wife, the Dornish princess Aelia, with her child, the babe Aegon, who was purportedly murdered by Gregor Clegane along with his mother. Drogon doesn't figure into this scene, but it seems very important to Dany's character development and dragon identity, so we will cover it. Rhaegar is convinced that one of his children is the prince that was promised in a seemingly ancient prophecy. This scene shows that he thinks there must be 3 Targaryens to fulfill the prophecy, all his own children, which drives him to insist upon fathering another child, one that Aelia cannot bear. Most believe that he went on to father his 3rd child on Lyanna Stark, and that this child is Jon Snow. Dany and Jon are the characters most linked to the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Could Rhaegar have been right that the dragon must have 3 heads? Will there be a 3rd person who carries the king's blood, perhaps the Aegon we met in A Dance with Dragons, who most believe to be a Blackfyre pretender posing as the babe we see in this scene? Or could it be that someone else is the 3rd head? For instance, Tyrion and his siblings have been hypothesized to be Targs. I'm with Tyrion. Quentyn also tries to ride a dragon and possibly survived. And then there's Victarion, Euron, or any number of Daenerys' suitors and supporters who want a dragon.
"He has a song," the man replied. "He's the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire." He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's, and it seemed as if he saw her standing there beyond the door. "There must be one more," he said, though whether he was speaking to her or the woman in the bed, she could not say. "The dragon has 3 heads." He went to the window seat, picked up a harp, and ran his fingers lightly over its silvery strings. Sweet sadness filled the room as man and wife and babe faded like the morning mist, only the music lingering behind to speed her on her way.
Dany and Drogon again start to run, escaping strange sounds and guttering torches while trying to stay in a lighted area of the maze-like structure. Drogon doesn't like it one bit and has a very dragonish/angry reaction to the situation. This is possibly more protection.
Yet another torch went out as she stood pondering, and the sounds grew faintly louder. Drogon's long neck snaked out and he opened his mouth to scream, steam rising from between his teeth. He hears it too. Dany turned to the blank wall once more, but there was nothing.
Not long after that scene, Dany invokes her mantra that the blood of the dragon must not be afraid, to give herself courage, also saying a prayer. Something that seems associated with telepathic magic in this story. Even though she prays to a horse god, the prayer may instead be heard by her dragon with the Dothraki namesake. When Dany arrives at a chamber that purports to be the Undying One's, Drogon shows his acute sense of danger, going right to the door, leading Dany away from this forged scene. Note that they offer to teach her about dragons. Such an offer would be very much a temptation to Dany, who knows very little on the subject and is clearly learning on the fly. It is a clever ploy, but fortunately, she takes her cue from Drogon and not the false vision.
She took a step forward, but then Drogon leapt from her shoulder. He flew to the top of the ebony and weirwood door, perched there, and began to bite at the carved wood. "A willful beast," laughed a handsome young man. "Shall we teach you the secret speech of dragonkind? Come, come." Doubt seized her. The great door was so heavy, it took all of Dany's strength to budge it, but finally it began to move. Behind was another door, hidden. It was old grey wood, splintery and plain, but it stood to the right of the door through which she'd entered. The wizards were beckoning her with voices sweeter than song. She ran from them. Drogon flying back down to her. Through the narrow door she passed, into a chamber awash in gloom.
The door leads to the actual Undying Ones. They are described as nearly unmoving, nearly dead. Throughout her time in this room, they invoke the moniker, Mother of Dragons.
Mother of Dragons, came a voice, part whisper and part moan. Dragons, dragons, dragons. Other voices echoed in the gloom. Some were male and some female. One spoke with the timbre of a child. The floating heart pulsed from dimness to darkness. It was hard to summon the will to speak, to recall the words she had practiced so assiduously. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, Queen of the 7 Kingdoms of Westeros. Do they hear me? Why don't they move? She sat, folding her hands in her lap. Grant me your counsel, and speak to me with the wisdom of those who have conquered death.
They also tend to add new monikers to her title, here calling her Child of Three, although it's unclear what that means.
Mother of Dragons, Child of Three.
Dany asks them to elaborate on her new moniker, but the response doesn't clarify anything. They first mention the 3 heads of the dragon that Rhaegar mentioned, but then they list 3 sets of 3 experiences she'll have. My current interpretation is that her character will embody or be a reflection of the results of these 3 fires, these 3 mounts, and these 3 treasons she will experience. In that way, she'll be a child of those experiences. She'll be reborn of them.
3 heads has the dragon. The ghost chorus yammered inside her skull with never a lip moving, never a breath stirring the still blue air. Mother of dragons, child of storm. The whispers became a swirling song. 3 fires must you light, 1 for life, and 1 for death, and 1 to love. Her own heart was beating in unison to the one that floated before her, blue and corrupt. 3 mounts must you ride, 1 to bed, and 1 to dread, and 1 to love. The voices were growing louder, she realized, and it seemed her heart was slowing, and even her breath. 3 treasons will you know, once for blood, and once for gold, and once for love.
One worry is that experiencing treason or betrayal is generally not the type of thing to make you a better person. Some of these are probably in the past, but some have not yet come to pass. Then we get another trio of trios, this time trios of visions, each with another moniker. First, Daughter of Death, then Slayer of Lies, and finally, Bride of Fire, always accompanied by Mother of Dragons, representing 9 more experiences, some past and some present.
Then phantoms shivered through the murk, images in indigo. Viserys screamed as the molten gold ran down his cheeks and filled his mouth. A tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair stood beneath the banner of a fiery stallion, a burning city behind him. Rubies flew like drops of blood from the chest of a dying prince, and he sank to his knees in the water, and with his last breath murmured a woman's name. Mother of dragons, daughter of death. Glowing like sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. A cloth dragon swayed on poles amidst a cheering crowd. From a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. Mother of dragons, slayer of lies. Her silver was trotting through the grass to a darkling stream beneath a sea of stars. A corpse stood at the prow of a ship, eyes bright in his dead face, gray lips smiling sadly. A blue flower grew from a chink in a wall of ice and filled the air with sweetness. Mother of dragons, bride of fire.
So, to enumerate, She is child of 3 in that she has 3 children, her dragons, and she is reborn in her 3 fires, 3 mounts, 3 treasons, 3 familial deaths, 3 lies to slay, and 3 suitors, not to mention the other 2 heads of the dragon. That's 23 things. Eureka! We have found it. 23 is also the number of chromosome pairs in humans. So she is the daughter of her king's blood. Just kidding. To try to put more meaning to these visions is not our errand here in this video, but I do have some Reddit posts exploring these 3 sets of visions, and perhaps I'll release some of them as videos eventually. Moving on, she has another round of visions, highlighted by a dragon bursting from the brow of Mirri Maz Duur. I take this to mean that Dany does believe that the Mage's life was a required sacrifice for hatching her dragons. Again, some of these visions are past and some are possible futures.
Faster and faster the visions came, one after the other, until it seemed as if the very air had come alive. Shadows whirled and danced inside a tent, boneless and terrible. A little girl ran barefoot towards a big house with a red door. Mirri Maz Duur shrieked in the flames, a dragon bursting from her brow. Behind a silver horse the bloody corpse of a naked man bounced and dragged. A white lion ran through grass taller than a man. Beneath the mother of mountains, a line of naked crones crept from a great lake and knelt, shivering before her, their grey heads bowed. 10,000 slaves lifted blood-stained hands as she raced by on her silver, riding like the wind. "Mother!" they cried. "Mother! Mother!" They were reaching for her, touching her, tugging at her cloak, the hem of her skirt, her foot, her leg, her breast. They wanted her, needed her, the fire, the life, and Dany gasped and opened her arms to give herself to them.
With Dany immersed in the visions, it falls to Drogon to save her from the Undying Ones, who appear to be trying to envelop her and force her into their ranks. The visions apparently did not affect the dragon through their bond, or at least they weren't effective enough to hypnotize Drogon. The black dragon breaks through to her with the trifecta of communication through the bond: physical contact, a scream, and probably psionic contact. Sound, and especially touch, typically accompany stronger than normal telepathic bond interactions in our study of direwolves, so this is consistent. We also see further examples of this later in Dany's story, especially related to screams. After all, it is very dragonish to scream.
But then black wings buffeted her round the head, and a scream of fury cut the indigo air, and suddenly the visions were gone, ripped away, and Dany's gasp turned to horror. The Undying were all around her, blue and cold, whispering as they reached for her, pulling, stroking, tugging at her clothes, touching her with their dry, cold hands, twining their fingers through her hair. All the strength had left her limbs. She could not move. Even her heart had ceased to beat. She felt a hand on her bare breast, twisting her nipple. Teeth found the soft skin of her throat. A mouth descended on one eye, licking, sucking, biting.
Drogon's scream cut to Dany's core and ripped away the facade of the visions. When Dany realizes the truth of it all, I hypothesize that her fury and desperation mirror to Drogon through the bond, compounding his own existing emotions as he immolates the Undying Ones, the dark heart, and the room at large, the fire eventually spreading to the entire compound.
Then indigo turned to orange, and whispers turned to screams. Her heart was pounding, racing. The hands and mouths were gone. Heat washed over her skin, and Dany blinked at a sudden glare. Perched above her, the dragon spread his wings and tore at the terrible dark heart, ripping the rotten flesh to ribbons. And when his head snapped forward, fire flew from his open jaws, bright and hot. She could hear the shrieks of the Undying as they burned, their high, thin, papery voices crying out in tongues long dead. Their flesh was crumbling parchment, their bones dry wood soaked in tallow. They danced as the flames consumed them. They staggered and writhed and spun and raised blazing hands on high, their fingers bright as torches. Dany pushed herself to her feet and bowled through them. They were light as air, no more than husks, and they fell at a touch. The whole room was ablaze by the time she reached the door. "Drogon!" she called, and he flew to her through the fire.
And that was Drogon's victory. We'll come back for the conclusion of the chapter and the rest of the volume next time. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. Thanks especially to those in my family who helped in this series so far. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider